I'm in there. Getting online.
And I know it's 2:30 right now. Just let me know when we have quorum and then we can get started with the meeting. I'll wait to hear from you.
We're good to go, Chair. It's 2:30 on the dot.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks, Jen. Okay, so let's officially call this meeting to order. As you said, Jen, it's now 2:30 for the record. Just a few housekeeping items before we get into the formal agenda here. Chair Toth will not be present today. She sends her regrets. She won't be able to attend the meeting today. The board is back. Our last meeting was back in June 16th, a couple months back. So this is our first meeting back. Despite the fact that the board didn't meet over the summer months, the committees were very busy with different initiatives, some of which you're going to hear about today during the public board meeting. And then, as always, we try our best to have the public board meeting posted on YouTube within 24 hours or so of this meeting. So if we check online tomorrow around this time, we hope to have this meeting posted then. Another quick housekeeping item. We had discussed just before we went on the summer break, there was discussions about moving away from the virtual model that we've been meeting in during COVID. Recall like when the rest of the world shut down, the London Police Services Board moved to a completely online model, online virtual model. There were some discussions in recent months about moving back to in-person meetings, and ultimately there was I believe there was a motion passed at one of our June meeting or May meeting about moving towards a hybrid model. So I wanted to provide just a very brief update to say that the plan was to transition back to this hybrid model, or transition to a hybrid model in the fall. And so we're still trying, I think, cautiously optimistic, Jen, that we'll be able to October or November, move to that fully hybrid model. So it'll be a combination of those who want to attend in person can attend in person, those who want to attend virtually, as we are right now, can attend virtually, and then members of the public will also have the ability to participate virtually as well. So this may be, fingers crossed, we're going to assess and see how the reality is over the next 30 days between now and our next meeting. But this may be our last exclusively virtual meeting for hopefully forever. But if not, we'll move to the hybrid model there. So, and then lastly, before we start the actual formal agenda, I wanted to take a minute on behalf of the London Police Services Board to remember Constable Hong of the Toronto Police Service. Constable Hong was murdered on September 12th. He was 48 years old, husband, a father to two teenage children. He was described as a family man and was described in media reports as a, quote, as a gentle giant. Magnetic personality, and he was shot. He was ambushed and attacked while in uniform on a lunch break. And he was a 22-year veteran of the Toronto Police Service. And there was also a civilian that was killed during this same series of events, Shakil Ashraf, and 3 others were injured. And I just wanted to take a moment on behalf of the board just to say that our hearts, our thoughts, our prayers go out to the families, to the friends, and to the colleagues of Constable Hong and all the other victims of this horrific event, and the entire community and police brothers and sisters across the proper and policing jurisdictions there. So I just wanted to take a minute and recognize his sacrifice there. And with that, just to transition into that, we'll go to ask the board whether there's any disclosures of interest there. So if any members have any disclosure of interest, please let me know right now. Seeing none. Is there any, I know that there's new business. There's one item, but before I get into that, is there any new business that any of the members would like to introduce to add to the agenda item? Okay, seeing none. I know that there was one item, the 2023 assessment growth submissions was, we're going to move that to the, from Finance Administration Public to Police Board Public. So can I get a motion by one of the members that the board receives for discussion the 2023 assessment growth submissions, memo 2299 during agenda item 20? Member Walker moved. Can I have a seconder, please? Member Branscombe, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Okay, Deputy Chief Betts, I have you up next with the Community Outreach and Support Team, the COAST interim update presentation, and I know you have a couple of guests for us today, so I'll pass it over to you, Deputy Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, good afternoon to all. So as we prepare to start, I hope you'll indulge me as I just say a few words of acknowledgement before turning things over to Inspector Harvey, whose portfolio includes oversight of the LPS contribution to the COAST, as well as sitting on the Governance Committee. I'd just like to start with saying that I realize that some of you joining us today may be unaware of the beginnings of COAST, and for the purposes of context at its highest level, I'll just say that COAST was really created as a means of wanting to support some of our most vulnerable members of the community in their time of need with the most appropriate response. And in this instance, that means those for whom mental health presents as a very real challenge. We all agree that police may not always be the most appropriate response, but has often been the case, police were the only response available. And we still remain the response with a mandate to intervene with an apprehension during an acute crisis. But to help address this, a coalition of partners was brought together with a singular purpose: to shift responses from being police-led and police responded to only, to a healthcare-led model that's police-supported. And you'll recall that LPS shifted $500,000 away from our operating budget to support this initiative because we believe strongly in this program. As LPS retired Superintendent Bill Chantler, who I believe is with us online today, well, he was the workhorse on the LPS side who spearheaded this initiative, finding willing and eager partners in CMHA, St. Joseph's Healthcare Center, and Middlesex London Paramedic Services. And together, they came together and demonstrated that a coalition of people all focused on supporting the community can do great things. And from this, Coast was born. Of course, as with any new program, key performance indicators and metrics to measure successes or opportunities for improvement is required. And to ensure an unbiased assessment, an independent researcher was secured who has expertise in the field and is unrelated to any of the partners. And with independent funding, he was sought and engaged. And you'll hear more about him in his review shortly. For many in the 4 partner agencies and community, this will be their first time hearing the results of this assessment. And while this is an overview presentation, I can assure you there is a much more fulsome document that speaks at length of the outcomes to date. Like the presentation, most of you will not have read it. And as we too have only just recently received it. So to that end, the Coalition of Partners is committed to releasing the report in its entirety on September 29th, 2 weeks from now, to allow each agency time to process the findings, clarify any comments, recommendations, and observations. But be clear, the report is complete. It remains complete as written, and we understand there will be intense community interest in that report. We just need some time with it to reply to any community or public questions in the most fulsome manner we can. The report will be posted to the Coast website hosted by CMHA in 2 weeks' time. I've had a chance to review the report, and I find it to be fulsome review of our new program. And as you might imagine, there are some growing pains in areas that may benefit from adjusting. And just after a year, that's to be expected. There are details surrounding things like terminology and a vision that may need clarification. And what jumps out at me is just really assessing the different lexicon and the words and terminologies used between agencies. Consider for a moment something as simple as police-led versus healthcare-led. And what's everyone's understanding of that? Does it mean that because the 911 calls come through LPS, and as such, all mental health calls are in our dispatch queue, ensuring that they get a response, and that LPS provides the vehicles and LPS officers are on each shift? Does that mean it's police-led? Or is it that when Coast teams engage with a person in crisis, that the trained healthcare professional is the primary contact and an officer supports them? And is that healthcare-led? You can see there are some basics that we have different meanings for different people and based on perspective and experience. And those are the things we really need to process as we review this report. It's a new program. It's an exciting program. It's exciting to see the results and hear the voices of those most impacted. Today's a primer presented by an independent expert in evaluation. And with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Inspector Harvey and hope I haven't stolen too much of his thunder. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. As you've suggested, since the outset of the Coast team here in London, the community partners recognize that an independent and comprehensive review of the program would be essential to assess the value and to allow for improvements and adjustments. I'm happy today to introduce Dr. Craig Bunnell and Ms. Tori Semple from the Police Research Lab at Carleton University. Over the past several months, Craig and Tori have completed an independent review of our Coast program, and they are here today to provide an overview of their findings to the board and to the community. And I'll pass things now over to Craig and Tori. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Blair. Very nice to be here. Very nice to meet all of you. I appreciate the invitation, and both Tori and I, Tori's here as well. Both Tori and I are very excited to share our results with you. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can everyone see the screen? Get a thumbs up. Excellent. All right, so I know you have a very busy schedule, so I'm going to get right into it. Again, very excited to share our findings related to the evaluation of the Community Outreach and Support Team in London, Ontario. As all of you, I'm sure, know, the Coast was implemented in April 2021. It's intended to be a healthcare-led, police-supported program that attempts to provide proactive support to individuals in the London community who are at risk of requiring LPS responses to their mental health and addictions issues or crises. As has been mentioned already, it's a collaboration between 4 organizations, 3 healthcare-led organizations, and then the London Police Service. So we have the Canadian Mental Health Association, St. Joseph's, the Paramedic Service, and the London Police Service. This is discussed obviously in much more detail in the full report, but we drew on a number of different data sources. But one of the most important things I think to emphasize around the evaluation is that it was funded independently. It was funded through the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, what we refer to as SSHRC. And we think this is important because it was one additional mechanism that allowed us to ensure that the report was done independently. There are a large number of findings that are obviously presented within the report. Obviously, I don't have time to go through all of those findings today in this brief presentation. So what I've done is I've focused the findings around 3 different sets of results, all of which relate to core goals of the community outreach and support team. And probably the most fundamental goal of the COAST is that it is intended to improve the experiences and the outcomes for clients, for community members within London who are experiencing crises related to their mental health issues or addictions. And I would say very clearly, our findings from this evaluation support this. It is indeed the case that the COAST appears to be providing a much better experience to clients and much better outcomes. For example, compared to a typical LPS patrol response, it's quite clear from the findings that the COAST is able to spend more time with clients, that they're better able to understand client needs, that they're able to put care plans in place and help clients follow those care plans. And this allows the COAST to provide something other than a Band-Aid solution, which is often how clients would describe the solutions by LPS patrol officers. They simply didn't have the time to create long-term meaningful solutions, and COAST seems able to do that. We surveyed clients, and we have a lot of data around client satisfaction, and those survey results suggest that clients are very satisfied with the COAST. More than 80% are very satisfied with the COAST or satisfied with the COAST, as you can see on this graph on the right-hand side. Within that client satisfaction survey, we also asked about short-term diversion within 3 days of interacting with the COAST, whether the client needed to engage with the hospital or with the police. And most clients indicated that they did not have to do that following the interaction with COAST, suggesting some sort of short-term diversion. Obviously, the program is young, so we haven't had the chance to look at long-term diversion data, but in terms of short-term diversion, it seems to be accomplishing that. When asked, most clients also indicated, over 90% of them that responded to this question indicated that they would use the COAST again if needed. And given that we believe that the COAST does provide an optimal outcome, that's a very positive result. And also through interviews with clients and other folks, it's clear that COAST members are seen as more compassionate, more empathetic, and more support focused than the typical LPS patrol response. They bring skills to the table, knowledge to the table, but most importantly, compassion to the table. And as a result, many people described or characterized the interaction with the COAST as being very therapeutic and support focused rather than enforcement focused, which is how they often described LPS patrol responses. So that's one set of findings which relate to what we see as a core goal of COAST. Another core goal of COAST is to reduce the need for an LPS frontline response to people experiencing crises within the community. And by doing that, also as a byproduct, relieve some of the pressure on LPS frontline. And again, the research suggests that it's clear that the COAST is accomplishing this. It does, in fact, decrease the need for an LPS frontline response. There's a variety of different data sources that we pulled on to draw that conclusion. One is that we know from operational data that the COAST is in fact responding to a lot of clients in the community. It's estimated that between 100 and 150 clients per month are responded to by COAST. Many of these are coming from LPS referrals and calls taken out of the LPS call queue. And these are calls that would have been responded to by LPS Patrol if it were not for the COAST. We also know from the data we collected that a lot of time is spent by COAST on follow-ups with clients after the interaction, again, to make sure they're following through on their care plan, modifying care plans if barriers are accounted, and so on. And these follow-ups are very likely to prevent calls to 911, further preventing LPS frontline responses to people in need. We asked the clients in the client satisfaction survey what they would have done when they were experiencing the crisis if COAST was not available to respond to them. 33% of those clients indicated that they would have called 911. Another 28% said that they would do nothing and they would have tried to deal with the issue themselves. So again, this seems to be diverting clients from having to call 911 because of coast availability. And again, as mentioned on the previous slide, further indications that there's a reduction in need for an LPS frontline response is that coast seems to be leading to short-term diversion away from the hospital and the police. And again, the fact that clients indicate that they're likely to use coast again when needed in the future suggests that it will reduce the need for a frontline response from patrol officers for their crises. The third set of findings that I'll talk about relate to a goal of coast that it will have a sort of impact on broader community and hospital support for people in need within the London community. In contrast to the two previous areas that I spoke to, I think the research that we did and the findings that emerged from that research provide more mixed evidence in support of this goal. One of the things that we did was conducted surveys pre-implementation, so before coast was implemented and post-implementation. And many of the questions on those surveys looked at perceptions by staff members within the 4 partner organizations, perceptions about the quality of care provided by various community and hospital supports. And we found very few differences on those metrics across the pre and post survey, suggesting that there isn't the sort of improvement that we might have expected as a result of coast being implemented on the broader support provided by community and hospital resources. That being said, the reason I'm suggesting it's mixed evidence is that there was other indications in other data sources that the coast is having a sort of broad effect. For example, some findings suggest that the coast is having an effect on learning within the partner organizations, and there is a perception that that learning is leading to improvements in service. As but one example of that, there is indications that as a result of coast, through informal interactions with coast and through observing coast interacting with clients, there is some indications, certainly amongst some of the people that we interviewed, that LPS officers are becoming more trauma informed, at least some of them, and they are starting to use more community resources and referring to more community resources. So this would be an example of a potential positive impact of this learning. This led us in the report to make the conclusion here on your right. This is us saying this in the report, that while coast is appearing to have a localized significant positive effect on clients, it perhaps isn't having a broader, more pervasive impact on how interactions with people in crisis in the community or in hospital are handled. And I think this reinforces the point that coast is not a silver bullet. In order to have this broader impact, it will be necessary for additional change to happen, system-wide change that goes far beyond what coast can achieve. So our overall conclusion in the report, I would say, if I needed to sum it up, is that the coast is having a very positive impact. All of the data sources contribute to that conclusion. I think it's particularly impressive that it's having an impact, given how young it is and given that it's been operating at a time when we're dealing with a worldwide pandemic. I know that London, like other Ontario cities, have been severely impacted by that pandemic. So the fact that it's having such a positive impact under such non-ideal conditions, I think, is very promising for what it might achieve in the future. Despite those positive findings, we did hear a number of concerns about the coast throughout the last year when we were conducting the evaluation. And these are opportunities, I think, for as you look forward to the next year, ways that you can improve the coast to have an even more significant impact as it moves forward. One of the key concerns that we had was that coast was not always available when required. We've heard this loud and clear from a number of LPS frontline patrol officers, for example, that there were calls that they felt would benefit from coast response, but because of a lack of resources, coast wasn't available. Our recommendation attached to that concern is that as funding permits, our view is that all 4 organizations should look at how coast can be enhanced, increased in size, operating hours expanded, and maybe look at opportunities for expanding team composition as well. For example, right now, there are no nurses from the London Health Sciences Centre, and that's maybe a potential opportunity to expand the team composition. Another concern that we heard was around role confusion, around a lack of understanding from certain parties around what coast does. what it is, and so on. And again, we would recommend right away that a comprehensive communication strategy be put in place to clearly articulate to certainly staff within the 4 partner organizations, but also to the broader community, the broader ecosystem of community support services and hospital services, to clearly articulate what the coast is, when it should be used, what it does, how it differs from other support services within the ecosystem that exists within London. And we think that will have a very positive effect in the short term. As Stuart mentioned earlier, we also heard some concerns around, over time, in some ways at least, the coast becoming more police-led. And again, this wasn't necessarily a majority view, but it was raised by a number of people. And again, it's unclear what it means, in large part because of issues that Stuart has raised around understanding of what these terms actually mean, what they look like in practice, and so on. What we would recommend is that as soon as possible, that the 4 partner organizations get together with Coast members, and they have very open and frank discussions about what these sorts of terms mean. Decide what they want the program to look like in relation to being healthcare-led and police-led. Set up mechanisms to determine whether the program is drifting from those desired goal states, and then figure out how to correct that drift if it is in fact happening. I'm happy to speak to this more after the presentation if there's questions, but that was another concern that we heard. The 4th concern that we heard is that clients are not always following up with the supports that are referred to them by the Coast members. There's I would say a significant number of clients in need who are not following up with those supports, and we think that it would be very worthwhile to, in a more focused way than we were able to do, to investigate why clients are not following up with these referrals. And then the last concern that I'll mention here, I think probably goes beyond Coast, to be honest, and probably does require some broader system-wide changes to have a positive impact. But it was a significant enough concern raised by enough people that we wanted to include it here, and that relates to concerns around the police hospital handover protocol. There were concerns, certainly from the police service, that the process was fairly inefficient, that police officers were spending a great deal of time in emergency rooms waiting for clients to be assessed and potentially admitted. There were also concerns raised around police hospital communication. So we would recommend that those issues be looked at. I think there's some potential to establish some processes to improve efficiency, and potentially some joint police hospital training that can benefit both the police and the hospital around improved communication. I'm going to leave it there because I know you have a very busy schedule. I want to leave you with a few quotes that you can just read by yourself. These are quotes from clients that we interviewed. Each of these individuals, these are pseudonyms. We allowed them to choose pseudonyms that they wanted to be referred to within the reports. Each of these are clients that interact with the Coast, and to me, despite these concerns that I just mentioned, I think these sort of quotes, and we could have chosen many more to present to you, I think these sort of quotes show you the impact that the Coast is having on people experiencing mental health and addictions-related crises within the community. So I'll leave it there. Very happy to answer any questions if you have any. I've provided my email here, and by all means, if you have questions after the meeting, you can certainly contact me through email.
Chair, I'll just wrap up and say thank you to Dr. Bunnell. Thank you to Ms. Semple. Very much appreciate the time and effort that's put into this. And Chair, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Coast partners who have joined us here today on this call as well. I see a couple jumping off at least my first screen, Lori Hassel and Deb Gibson. I don't know that our paramedic services were able to join us today. At least they're not on my first screen. But I think that's important because this is not just a police-led program. Certainly, we committed to the board to provide information and feedback, but this is a true partnership between four parties, all focused on the same goal. And it's important that we're all here today to be able to present this and the conclusion of this particular study. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Betts, and thank you to you as well, Dr. Bunnell, for your presentation today. And with that, do any members of the board have any questions, discussion with regards to the presentation that we just had? And if so, please let me know. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. And thank you, Stu, and thanks, Doctor, for the your presentation on Coast again. Could you define who a client is?
What a client is?
Hmm.
In the context of this, again, other people around the table may be better positioned to do so, but from our perspective, for the purpose of the evaluation, it would be a community member within London who's experiencing some sort of crisis, typically a mental health related crisis or an addictions related crisis, but crises are complicated and often other issues come into play around poverty and unstable housing and so on. But for some reason, primarily mental health and addictions related, they're experiencing a crisis where they require additional support. I think that to us would be how we would sort of conceptualize what the client is in this case. Obviously, clients in the sense that these are individuals within the context of our evaluation that did interact with the Coast. All of the clients that we interviewed interacted with the Coast, and many interacted previously with frontline patrol staff from the LPS, and obviously some of the other support services that exist within London.
I've been to your Coast office, our Coast office, excuse me, I should say, at the 24/7 crisis center. We brought the Associate Minister of Health out to see that, and he was exceptionally impressed and quite struck by Coast. What happens when you, I know what this is all intended to do in terms of de-escalate a potentially challenging situation and get people settled down, but I'm really and give them the right kind of direction for care. Help me understand what that means, because that could mean a referral, I suppose, to the 24/7 crisis center. But do the highest acuity folks go to that 24/7 center that you deal with, or is that within your bailiwick and call to make?
Again, I'll turn that over to Lori's probably better positioned than I am to address that.
Hey, Lori.
Hi, thanks for your question. So, I mean, it's hard to define who the typical client is, except for the fact that they would be experiencing a crisis, as Craig mentioned. The team has seen, a variety of people from youth that are experiencing suicidal ideation. We've had a lot of those types of situations, to maybe someone struggling with addictions and trauma, to an older adult. So the whole gamut. I think that the commonality is that crisis. So they may have called 911, or a family member may have called 911 asking for help. We've also supported individuals experiencing homelessness. And some of those people may be people who have frequent contact with LPS. And that's the outreach component, actually going out and finding people who have been in crisis, who we suspect are in crisis, and trying to do some of that proactive support, connection to service, some of those pieces. So at the crisis center, anybody can walk in. In reference to your question. So you don't have to have an appointment. It's 24/7. And there's a variety of people walking in, and some of them are at high acuity. In terms of the crisis beds, we aren't able to support people there who would be deemed the highest acuity. And by that, I would mean people who are suicidal, who have a plan, who have had the means and they're not willing to safety plan, or people with, very exacerbated mental health or addiction symptoms. So they're not able, it may impact the safety of other people in the beds. So Coast would be seeing some of those people out on the street when they're doing their outreach. They may be getting referrals to some of those individuals and supporting them getting to the hospital for a psychiatric assessment. Or they may be seeing people who are in crisis, but we would consider lower acuity, and they're intervening, connecting them to services. They do provide a lot of follow-up, which has been really helpful for individuals. That sometimes that first time listening, validating, it's so helpful, but connecting people to longer term service, like a transitional case manager or some addiction support and counseling. they may be doing that type of thing. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Lori, that helps some. Chair, I'm not going to prolong this, but I do want to ask Dr. Bennell one other question. So we've heard Lori say that if they're the highest acuity, they're not candidates for the crisis center. But you deal with these folks as you come as you do, whether they've come in or whether you've gone out to the streets to deal with them. But we know that the challenges on the streets are on the rise. Whether these folks are coming from away or whether they are local Londoners, it doesn't matter. We have an obligation to take care of those folks, but it absolutely seems to be on the rise. So and not abating. So how do we know your program's working?
How do we know?
Oh yeah, you go ahead, Craig.
No, you go ahead.
I would just say, looking at the number of contacts, so the team's supporting upwards of 150 individuals a month and connecting to services, we're looking at those pieces. I think that the feedback that the researchers got in the evaluation from individuals have said it was a positive and helpful experience.
But sorry, Lori, and I don't know what that means. And I guess where I'm trying to go is, how do we know it's working? You know, we've got such an incredible increase on the streets, which is not you, not us, but it's there and we deal with it. But are we measuring this in terms of people where we've been able to give them care, where we've been able to look at some form of non-repetitive behaviors? I'm just trying to get some measuring sticks on this so I can better understand. And maybe this is better as an offline discussion, because it is such a critical issue in our city. We all know it. We all deal with it. All our citizens talk to us as politicals every day, and I'm sure to the police about this. It's an immense issue. So that's why I'm trying to understand, how do we know it's working?
I mean, I think the reality from my perspective is that the program is extremely young. So from an evaluation perspective, it's very challenging at this point in time to have data that speaks to some of the issues that I think you're getting at, because this will relate to long-term diversion, long-term decreases in the sorts of activities that Coast is trying to have an impact on. What I will say is what we were able to accomplish in the short term, given that, you know, the program's been around now for a year, is that I think the pieces are in place that one would expect to have this long-term impact. Obviously, we need to continue to measure these things. We need to continue to measure, does this in fact divert them away from the criminal justice system in a meaningful long-term fashion? The program is too young and the evaluation period was too short given that to speak to those issues. But the pieces are in place. They're responding in the way that we would want them to respond to a Coast interaction that would suggest that that's what we're going to find when we do further evaluations over the longer term. They are, well, not all of them, they are connecting to these supports that are provided, which is all about continuity of care and the right appropriate support. So again, you know, unfortunately, from my perspective, from the evaluation, I don't think we can speak yet to some of the issues that I totally appreciate that you need to address on the part of the city. But I would say the evaluation does suggest that it looks promising for the long term, given what we're finding at this point.
I appreciate those answers. Thanks. We will talk again. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your questions, Mayor Holder. Do any other members have any questions with regards to this report? I thought I saw a hand up, but now it's down. I don't know who had it up, but anyways, any members questions? Okay. Oh yeah, Councillor Helmer, go ahead.
Just a comment. I think it's really good sign, encouraging sort of initial results from the relatively quick evaluation. And I think it's a very good practice that this program has not been around for very long, and it was mobilized very quickly, and to already have some evaluation to feed into how can we change it before we start to scale it up too much, I think is actually really well timed. And I know it's not going to give us the answers to every question, but I certainly want to read the whole thing. I think the presentation covered off a number of pretty important points, and I'm glad to see that it's headed in that direction. It looks like it's a very positive intervention as we expected it would be. And I want to commend the chief and the leadership team for driving it forward, including Bill Chandler, who pushed us in this direction in the beginning. It's not easy to implement something new with all the rest of the stuff going on. It's a busy, difficult time, and I want to commend the team for doing that.
I will say, just on that point, I mean, what we do know is that what the coast does in the short time period that it's been in place is that it has provided a safe environment for these clients. And, I know we may want to see some other metrics over the long term, but I don't think we can underestimate the value of that. They feel validated within these interactions. They feel safe. They feel heard. And as a result of that, I think they're much more likely to engage with the coast in the future. And that those sorts of metrics we do have and we do know. And I think that's extremely important when you look at the way in which these clients feel when they have interactions with patrol officers on a regular basis, often traumatized, often stigmatized, often criminalized. I think we do have sufficient data at this point that the coast is having a very significant impact on those sorts of metrics. And I think that's very positive. And I think it will lead to, my hope is, and I think it will lead to, certainly the research would suggest, the broader research would suggest that will lead to positive outcomes in the future, longer term outcomes.
Thanks, Dr. Bennell. Members, any further questions or discussion? Member Walker, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation today. I just wanted to say very briefly that I am a member of the Mental Health and Addictions Advisory Panel in London, and the COAST program is one of the 4 areas of focus, and some of those members have been on the call today, and I know how pleased they are with particularly those individuals who have lived experience, how pleased they are with this program. And the value. So I wanted you to know that feedback from the committee.
Thanks for sharing that, Member Walker. All right, members, last call on questions or discussion on this one before I call for a motion on this. Okay, seeing none. Can I get a mover for a motion that the board receives for informational purposes the COAST update presentation by Dr. Craig Bennell? Just need somebody to move that. Member Branscombe, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Anyone object? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you very much to Deputy Chief Betts, Dr. Fennell, and the rest of the team for that presentation. Much appreciated. Okay, moving on to the next matter. Our last meeting, board meeting, was on June 16, 2022, and members, in your package is a copy of the minutes from that meeting. Are there any questions or clarifications arising from the minutes? And if so, please let me know. There are none. Seeing none, can I get a motion or a mover for the motion that the minutes of the June 16, 2022 board meeting be adopted as presented? Sorry, I see Jen with your hand up there. What's going on?
Sorry, Chair, I just needed to remind the group we need to adjourn that meeting because technically it didn't happen. Because we went into another conversation then in a different meeting, remember? And then we came back to it. So it was a very confusing day that day in June. So could we adjourn the June 16th meeting? It was a very long meeting.
Yeah. Robert's Rules of Order to the forefront again here. So let's before we get to the minutes, let's bring a motion to adjourn the meeting of June 16, 2022. I see Member Branscombe moving that motion, seconded by Member Walker. Anyone opposed? I mean, for the record, if anyone opposes adjourning a meeting from 3 months ago, that'll be new, but no one opposed? Okay, all right. That's carried. All right, we can tick that box off, Jen, and move on to the minutes now. So let's go back to the minutes that I just spoke. So the minutes from that same meeting that we just adjourned. Can I get a mover to accept those minutes? Member Branscombe, seconded by Member Walker. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody, for helping correct that there. Moving on to number 6 in our agenda, we have public correspondence. Members, in your package, you'll see 3 different pieces of correspondence. I'm going to dispense from reading verbatim the actual correspondence. It's in your package. You've had an opportunity to read it, but I will just, for the benefit of everybody else here. The first letter is a letter of congratulations and gratitude to Acting Sergeant Ziad Zabian who received the OACP Award for Excellence in the Advancement of Equity, Diversity, Inclusivity in Policing. The second piece of correspondence is from a citizen, Paul Uford, related to the Hockey Canada matter or investigation. And the third piece of correspondence is from a citizen business owner, Lisa Salabank of Salon Entre Nous, related to issues in the downtown London. So like I said, I'm not going to read them into the record, but if there are any questions or discussion in relation to those three pieces of correspondence that were received, now's the opportunity to raise them. So anybody have any questions or discussion? Okay, seeing, oh, no, did I see a hand? No, I did not. Okay. So what I'd like is a motion to move that the board receives for informational purposes the three items of public correspondence that I just raised there. So Member Branscombe moving, seconded by Mayor Holder. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. All right, number 7, Deputy Chief Betts, you're up with the Special Investigations Unit report. I'll pass the floor over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, just a very quick, because I know you have the report in front of you here. This is just the administrative review following the SIU investigation into an incident that took place on March 6th, 2022. This investigation by the SIU was completed in fairly expeditious fashion, and on June 28th, we had a conclusion to report that there were no findings of criminality by our officer. I just would point out, though, in light of our recent observances here in the city, how something involving a motorcycle and as easy as a traffic stop can turn quickly into something tragic through no fault of the officer in this particular case, merely trying to initiate a traffic stop. The rider of that motorcycle fled from the officer. The officer did not engage in a pursuit, and you'll hear more about pursuits later on in the agenda. And unfortunately, this particular rider came to a crashing stop. As you'll see, our officer did nothing wrong other than trying to do his job. And as a result of that, the SIU had to invoke their mandate. And fortunately, it was cleared up as expeditiously as possible. So unless there's any questions to this one, it's pretty straightforward, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Betts. Members, well, actually, you know what? We're going to take a bifurcated response to these, because actually, Deputy Chief McIntyre, you're going to provide a report on one of these matters that you've had in your carriage from before. So maybe before we get to that one, if there's any questions or discussion with regards to Deputy Chief Betts's part of the report, we can ask those now, and then we'll move over to Deputy Chief McIntyre for her part there. So any questions? Okay, seeing none, Deputy Chief McIntyre, your portion of the Special Investigations Unit report, please.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So this matter dealt with an in-custody death. And as the public and the board is well aware, we've taken enormous measures to correct processes and to increase safety in our cell block. So this is incredibly tragic, but I'm going to walk you through, just because of the interest to it, I'll walk you through a real brief overview of the details. On November the 2nd, 2019, a female was arrested and brought into our care, and she was going to be held for a bail hearing the following day. While in custody, she expressed some concern over needing some medication. And she was asking at that time to go to the hospital. Arrangements were made for her to be able to get her medication the following day from a pharmacy. The next day, November 3rd at 9:45, she's found in medical distress in her cell. And this is what highlights the incredible vulnerability of the people the police have to interact with and the risk associated with putting anybody in custody. She later died in hospital approximately 10 days later on November the 13th of 2019. That death causes the SIU to invoke their mandate. Initially, 2 of our officers were designated as subject officials. 1 was later redesignated as a witness officer for this matter. The SIU charged our officer at that time with failing to provide necessaries of life. On October the 18th of 2021, almost 2 years later, that charge is withdrawn. Why is that? So the Crown, now prosecuting this case, has to look at all of the facts and issues, and found that one of the main facts and issues, namely that the failure to facilitate access to medication created a risk to the deceased's life. That finding was corroborated by both Crown and Defense Counsel, who concurred with the findings of the pathologist, who again said that the lack of medication, in this case for heart medication, which was the request, did not cause or contribute to her death. It does not, saying that does not underscore, again, the incredible vulnerability and the devastating outcome here. So a comprehensive review is done, and we look at our procedures. This service is provided, and of course, the conduct of the officers all involved. They cooperated with that. You had a presentation months previous on all of the changes we have done currently to our cell block in recognition of this risk. And so that fulsome review has been completed and changes implemented back in June of 2022. In some of those even right away in January of that same year. So I present those facts for you. I apologize for the time. I just wanted you to understand kind of what happened there, why charges were laid and then later withdrawn, but I'm open to any questions you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Are there any questions for Deputy Chief McIntyre with regards to the report just provided? Okay, seeing none. I think what we'll do then is I'm just going to ask for one motion to approve both reports from Deputy Chief Betts and Deputy Chief McIntyre just under one motion, assuming sorry, question, Mayor Holder, or just want to move that motion? Move the motion. Okay. So thank you. Could I get, so Mayor Holder will move the motion that the board receives the special investigations report as required by the Police Services Act. Do we have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Helmer, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you to you both, Deputy Chief McIntyre and Deputy Chief Betts, for those reports. The next item on the agenda is number 9, dealing with the in-camera versus public meeting discussions. So members, if in your package there, you'll see that there is a report, a memorandum with regards to in-camera versus public meeting discussions. Again, it's in the package. You've all had a chance to review it before we get into a vote. Are there any questions or debate or discussion with regards to that? I see 2 hands, 3 hands. Why don't we start with, we'll start with you, Member Walker, but before I get to you, then Councillor Helmer, but first I want to go to Ms. Foster to see if there's any procedural thing that needs to be done here.
Chair, this one was being deferred because Chair Toth wanted to be here for the discussion.
Right. And so I think if that's the case, I think we need a motion to defer that, I believe, right? And so that might be what one or the members raise up there. So Member Walker, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I'll ask or I'll move that this be deferred to the next meeting and to be brought forward along with a legal opinion.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Mayor Holder, is there anyone opposed to that motion? Okay, so you know what, I won't do a poll vote here, but let me ask it this way. All in favor of the motion?
Chair, sorry.
Yeah, where
I want to speak, right? Do I get to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, give me 1 second here. So where are we here? Okay, so we have 1 opposed, Councillor Helmer. Councillor Helmer will have an opportunity to speak to that. Why don't you do that right now, Councillor Helmer, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead.
Right, so I'm happy to support a referral of this or deferral, depending on how you look at it. But I think the important part for me is that it go to the committee that deals with policy. So I know this has come directly to the board because we don't happen to have a legal governance and policy committee meeting before this meeting, because it's the finance committee this cycle, but we have one coming up. And I think we should send it to the committee like we do with all kinds of policy initiatives, not just this one, but also the next item on the agenda. So I'm happy to support the referral, but only if it's going to the committee and not if it's coming right back to the board again.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. So I'll go back to you, Member Walker. Then are you okay? It's up to you whether you wish to amend your motion to have it deferred to the governance committee or whether you wish to.
I have no objection to that. I would like to remain that a legal opinion be included, though.
Okay, perfect. But for the sake of clarity, just so that we know what all the members are voting on, your motion, could you reword your motion so that
let's go back to the governance committee for a fulsome discussion along with receipt of a legal opinion.
Perfect, thank you. So members, that's the new motion that's on the floor right now. Councillor Helmer, does that align with what your point was there? Thank you, sir. All right. So with that, now I'll ask all of those in favor of Member Walker's revised motion, please raise your hand. Okay, is anyone opposed to that? Seeing none, that motion is now deferred to the Governance Committee for review and consideration. Thank you. Okay, moving on in our agenda, the next matter is the draft London Police Services Board policy, search and detention of transgendered people. Again, just like the previous matter, that proposed policy is in your materials there. You've had a chance to review it. Is there any questions, debate, discussion with regards to that matter? Yeah, Member Walker, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I wonder if Chief Williams could just respond or update us around what is currently happening with respect to this.
Thank you, Chief. Looking for an update. Thank you, sir.
I can do that. Good afternoon. So I have reviewed the draft of the policy, and I completely agree with the spirit of the policy, and that every person who comes into contact with the police, either in the community or those who are placed under arrest and taken into custody, that they be treated with respect and treated in an unbiased manner. That's clearly the board's policy to consider, and I recognize the genesis of the discussion goes back to the arrest of the transgendered individual following a swatting incident. So I will merely indicate that that incident, the swatting, remains under investigation, and the manner in which we responded, first responders and officers involved in the investigation, is still under review. As I previously indicated. I can also say, just for your information, we do have a robust search and detention procedure, as well as a fair and impartial policing document that guides the actions of officers. Having said all that, when the investigation and the review are complete, we'll consider all the information and then determine if there are opportunities to improve upon our procedures. All that to say, that review is incomplete, and the results could inform any future discussions. So I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Or could I make another comment then, Mr. Chair, just with respect to that? I appreciate your update, Chief, and I would move that no action be taken until the chief has had the opportunity to provide his report to the committee for discussion. And I think in that case, it's likely best to come straight to the board rather than through governance.
Okay, thank you, Member Walker. So board, we have a motion that's been moved by Member Walker to defer this matter until after the investigation's concluded, and then it will return back to the board. Do we have a seconder for that motion before we open it up for discussion? Member Branscombe, seconder. Okay, any debate, discussion, questions with regards to Member Walker's motion? Councillor Helmer?
I don't agree with the timeline that Member Walker has proposed, having to wait till the investigation into a specific issue is concluded. That I don't think is necessary in order for us to consider high-level policy in this area. I also don't really understand why we would not send it to the policy committee, which is the committee responsible for dealing with these matters. It just seems like any other policy issue, that's where it should go. So I'm not going to support that specific referral, although I would support generally, giving the chief time to weigh in, having the committee deal with it as we just did with the previous item. And I think that would be, just as it was on the last item, a fine process to follow. So I guess I'll vote against this specific motion because it seems to be putting it off for an inordinate amount of time.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Any other members wish to weigh in on this? Okay, no, there we go. Councillor Cassidy, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the chief, there is an ongoing review on a related matter where this touches. And so I'm wondering through you, Mr. Chair, where you plan, Chief, to bring that review back. And so are these two items married? Are they completely separate? Should one go to governance and one go to board? Just your thoughts on that, Chief.
Over to you, Chief.
Thank you, through your chair. I'm not just confused on what a related matter you're speaking about, and obviously you didn't reference it for a reason, but just not clear in your question, I guess.
So I know that you're conducting a review on matters that are related to this policy. So I'm just wonder if you see these two things together or if they should be treated separately.
Well, I think, I mean, this draft policy, I can't speak for the board, obviously, but it appears to be related to the related matter, which is actually referenced in the memo. So I think they are related. My intent was to have the review completed into our handling of the response and make any necessary changes and report out on that.
So
If that answers your question.
yeah, thank you. And so through you, Mr. Chair, I do believe both matters are policy related, and I do agree with Councillor Helmer that means they should be addressed at the governance committee. I don't understand why we would do it differently.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments, Councillor Cassidy. So the motion that's on the floor right now is to have it deferred until the investigation is complete and then returned back to the board. That's the motion on the floor. We can either option A, vote on that motion and it's either passed or not or defeated, or subject to Member Walker, who initiated the motion. If she feels so inclined, she could amend the motion to have it report back to the governance committee. But as of this moment, the motion that's on the floor is to have it come back to the board. So I'll canvass Member Walker before I call the question on the vote there. So Member Walker, what's your desire in that front?
I'd like to have it come back to the board. This recommendation came through directly to the board, but unlike the other one, this has gained a lot of media, and I think that places it in a unique position and should come directly to the board.
Thank you, Member Walker. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a vote on the motion that's on the floor right now. If it's passed, then it's passed, and you know that's the will of the board. If it's defeated, then oh yeah, okay, go ahead.
So rather than have to vote against this, I would like to move an amendment myself and see if there is a seconder to amend the motion that this matter come before the governance committee.
Okay, so we have a
That's not an amendment. That changes the motion.
Yeah, that's contrary to my intent.
right, and so the motion that's on the floor right now is the one that I previously described from Member Walker. So I think what we're going to have to do on this one is vote on it, see what happens with it. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. There could be another motion that's suggested or offered at that time there. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, so any further debate discussion before I call the question on Member Walker's motion? Okay, seeing none. So just for the sake of clarity, and I'll repeat it one last time, Member Walker's motion is that the current motion be deferred until such time that the Chief of Police advises that the investigation is concluded, at which point in time there will be a report back to the London Police Services Board from the Chief. Okay,
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes.
That's the motion on the floor. We have a mover and a seconder by Member Branscombe. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. All opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, that motion is Ms. Foster, that motion is defeated 3-2. Okay, now if Councillor Cassidy, if you wanted to, or any other member of the board wanted to propose an alternative motion that having it go back to the governance committee, happy to entertain that right now for questions, debate, discussion, ultimately a vote. So I'll look to you, Councillor Cassidy. Would you like to do that?
Sure, I will move the exact same wording of that Member Walker proposed, except that it would go to the governance committee.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Well, we need a seconder, or that's where it dies. All right. All right, Mayor Holder, and all right, so Member Branscombe. Okay, so we'll go Mayor Holder as a seconder. Okay. Any debate, discussion, questions with regards to the revised motion that's on the floor now? Or actually, it's not a revised motion, it's a new motion. Any questions, debate, discussion with regards to Councillor Cassidy's motion? Yes, Councillor Helmer.
I'd just like to ask through the chair to the chief. I think we're using different terms to describe potentially the same thing, but I think that when Councillor Cassidy and others have said investigation, they mean review of this incident. And I guess my question through the chair to the chief is, can you give me a sense of how long you think that might take? Because maybe this is a distinction without a difference. If it's not going to be a long time, then I don't have such a concern with the language. If it is potentially going to be a long time, then I think I would have concern with the way the motion's worded to the point that I might vote against it. So could you give me a sense of how long it might take for this review to be completed?
Right. So when I say review, I'm speaking about a review of our response, not necessarily the criminal investigation, which is separate. I would say, and this is ballpark, so I'm not committing to it, but 30 to 60 days. I don't see it being less than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Okay. With that additional information, any further debate, discussion, questions with regards to the motion on the floor? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call the question on Councillor Cassidy's motion, that it be deferred and then ultimately until the review is completed and then ultimately returned to governance for consideration. So that being said, all in favor?
Yeah, sorry, did that include the legal opinion that was in Megan's motion too?
I believe Councillor Cassidy said basically verbatim with the exception of governance. So, but I'll look to Councillor Cassidy for clarity on that. Yes. Okay. So Member Branscombe answers yes to that. Okay. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. Any opposed, please raise your hand. Thank you. All right, Ms. Foster, that motion is carried. Thank you very much, Board. On that, we'll move on with the agenda to item number 11, Collection, Preservation, and Control of Evidence and Property Report. Deputy Chief McIntyre, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So this report comes to the board every year, and it just really gives you a synopsis or an overview of personal property, money, firearms that have come into the possession of the London Police Service through that report period, which is July to June. That is legislative compliance as per the Police Services Act. So the report breaks down basically 3 categories that you can see: the found items, money, and then firearms, and the volume taken in and what the disposition of those items are. But just my recommendation is that the board receive this report, and I can take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Board, any questions for Deputy Chief with regards to the report? All right. Seeing none, can I get a motion that the board receive for informational purposes the collection, preservation, and control of evidence and property as presented by Deputy Chief McIntyre? If I get a mover for that, sorry. Member Walker, is there a seconder, please? Member Branscombe, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Number 12 on the agenda is the Crime Stopper Statistical Report for Q1 and Q2 2022. Deputy Chief Betts, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, just briefly, this is a quarterly report, as you've indicated, with regard to Crime Stopper tips, and then the outcome of those particular tips, as you'll see in the 4 quadrant charts on page 2. Notably, the number of tips this quarter are down again from previous year during the same period of time, and as the chart in the top left corner will show you, that seems to be a trend that's continuing. The rest of the tips, as you can see here, are typically we're seeing results coming from tips related to narcotics. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, probably troubling for us here, is the number of weapons that are being seized as a result of the tips that we are able to action. So as has been communicated to this board in the past, the presence of weapons in our community continues to be a concern. And despite the reduced number of tips coming in, they are continuing to contribute to public safety. And the recommendation is that you receive this for your information. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Members, any questions for Deputy Chief Betts with regards to the Crime Stoppers report? Okay, seeing none. Exactly as you said, Deputy Chief Betts, we just need a motion. So can I get a mover for the motion that the board receive for informational purposes the Crime Stoppers statistical report for quarters 1 and quarters 2, 2022? Member Branscombe, do we have a seconder? Mayor Holder, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. But you're not off the hook just yet. Stays with you for suspect apprehension proceeds quarterly report. You, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And again, another quarterly report. You will have heard the first quarter in April, in which time we reported that we had 3 pursuits. And as you'll see, we had another 3 pursuits during this last quarter. This time, however, there were no indications of any contravention of our procedures and no damage as a result from those pursuits. I just hearken you back to the SIU matter that I spoke about and why it's important that we continue on with our training and that risk mitigation that we're involved with, as was reported to you earlier as well. And as you can see, the trends here are that pursuits are relatively rare for us, and we continue to have important training in relation to that. There really isn't anything else to report on this particular matter, but I am open to questions, and subject to that, it's recommended that the board receive this for their information.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Board, any questions or discussion with regards to Deputy Chief Betts' report? Seeing none, I will ask for a mover of the motion that the board receives for informational purposes the suspect apprehension pursuits quarterly report as presented by Deputy Chief Betts. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. And Deputy Chief Betts, we're staying with you for the 2022 semi-annual complaint report.
Thank you, Chair. And for the trifecta, I suppose here is the next report. This one related to, as you say, complaints, chief's complaints, and or OIPRD complaints. You'll see in the charts that start on page 2, we have provided you with information. The information as depicted is as it relates to the same period of time in the previous 4 years, so 2018 through to 2022. There are some categories that are up, some that are down, nothing that's of any particularly startling concern. I would take you over to page 3. And when we start looking at, despite the number of complaints that are submitted to the OIPRD, how many of them are deemed to be screened out before they even come to us, how many are unsubstantiated, and then of course how many are withdrawn. So a fairly significant amount would speak to people submitting these complaints quite often in the heat of a moment, but perhaps not necessarily staying through and with those. I can continue to go on into greater detail. However, there isn't a tremendous amount to provide you with in regard to that. I would take you to the last page and the chart on that page, as you will see here with regard to the types of alleged misconduct. And as you can see, we're seeing a downward trend in 2022 for this particular period, as opposed to previous years in terms of the misconduct allegations that are noted there. There's one thing I would like to, however, point out, and because it's something that we have recently sort of come across ourselves, and that is that the numbers that are represented for you here may not always represent or be reflective of the numbers on the OIPRD website for those that have compared as we have. And there is just a clarification in regard to classification of the OIPRD, how they track information and how they carry their complaints over. What's of importance here is that we continue to be consistent in how we approach it, so we are able to compare year over year based on a consistent methodology. And subject to any comments or questions, it's my recommendation the board would also receive this report for their information.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Any questions, debate, or discussion with regards to Deputy Chief Betts' report there from the board? Seeing none, okay, we'll ask for a mover for the following motion that the board receive for informational purposes the 2022 semi-annual complaint report as presented by Deputy Chief Betts. Can I get a mover for that? I see Member Branscombe, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Any objections? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you. All right, number 15 on our agenda is over to you, Deputy Chief McIntyre, for the electronic monitoring policy.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So just for history, on April the 11th of this year, the government introduced this policy that would be required for employers with more than 25 employees to have a written policy on electronic monitoring by October the 11th of this year. So attached is a draft policy, a draft board policy that we have created on your behalf. And we have already created a procedure that's just in its final stages here at this end. And what it does is basically says that you, the employer, now must share with your employees anytime, give them advice, heads up warning that if you're monitoring them by any means. So when you hear that, one would think, electronic monitoring, it could be keystrokes, it could be things like that. That's not the case for London. We have no intention of changing what we're doing here, but it's just helpful legislation to advise members of any type of monitoring. Could be through your phone, etc. Those things that already are pre-existing. The Employment Standards Act applies to civilian members under the legislation, not to sworn. So that's just an interesting thing I like to highlight. And the recommendation is that the board implement a policy directing the chief to create and implement a written procedure on electronic monitoring in accordance with the requirements of the ESA. So just a quick overview, but open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Board, any questions for Deputy Chief McIntyre with regards to the report that she just provided? Yep, Member Branscombe, go ahead. Nancy, I think you're on mute still.
Sorry. So through you, Chair, we don't monitor our employees now. Is that how I understand what you just said? Okay, and we're not intending to do, but if we ever wanted to, these would be the rules. Is that?
Yes, in part through you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, that's correct. Like, could we pull data that could be monitoring in nature? Like, I could see your cell phone can have GPS capabilities that track anyone driving in a cruiser. We track where that car is and what they do, but not actively. And I think that's what's important to highlight.
I see.
Yeah, thank you.
And so the procedure will be done and we'll see it at some point then that you're working on it now. Yes.
Yeah, the policy is that you direct the chief to generate an operational procedure, and we have that already in wings, and we'll have it in play by October the 11th for you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Branscombe. Any other members have a question for Deputy Chief McIntyre? Okay, seeing none, and I have a very brief question. It's really for the benefit of everybody else that may be listening. If I could just step down for a second, maybe Councillor Helmer, just according to Robert's rules, you could just pass it over to you for a second for chairing the meeting.
Sure, happy to chair. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you kindly. And it's really a kind of very easy question, but just for the benefit of anyone that may be listening in. So this is not specific to the London Police Services. That like the ESA requirement is for any organization, public study over 25. Just some clarity on that point. That is not specific just to us.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm nodding my head. You're completely right. Any employer that has over 25 employees must apply under the ESA with this policy.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Those are my questions, Councillor Helmer.
Okay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. All right. So I think I was the last one there, but last chance. Any questions on this? All right. Seeing none, can I get a motion moved that the board implement a policy directing the chief of police to create and implement a written chief's procedure on electronic monitoring in accordance with the requirements of the Employment Standards Act? If I get a motion, mover of that, I saw Member Branscombe, seconded by Member Walker. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on our agenda, we're at number 16, femicide recommendations and initiatives. I will pass it over to Member Walker.
Thank you very much. So I have submitted the report, really dating back to the beginning, where the board unanimously supported looking into femicide, followed by meetings with Deputy Chief Betts and his wisdom that was shared around drafting something for the board's attention, to going out into the public and seeking input. And I would like to indicate that we did receive input from 12 individuals and organizations. The organizations included the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Girls, and ANOVA. And one of the members of MHAP, the co-chair, Christine Geringer, also submitted information. And so I have been actively involved with working with the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability. Really, that is the expert. Canada is lucky to have them to provide that level of expertise. They work to prevent violence against women through data collection, resources, and strategies. And I want to extend gratitude to Myrna Dawson for the time she has given me. So basically, we have now before us recommendations as a result of the past several months' work. First of all, we would, or the recommendation would be that the public submissions be received, all of which have been sent to you, and a letter of appreciation be sent to the respondents, along with the final recommendations if they are passed today. Secondly, we did have 2 in-camera submissions, and I would request that or recommend that they be received, also with a letter of appreciation being sent to the respondents with the final recommendations. The Center for Research on the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Girls provided a recommendation that I am agreeing with strongly, that the the motion be changed to be consistent with Section 318, subsection 4 of the Criminal Code, which would include in section 2 of the recommendations, and the second last line of section 2 would be changed to specifically reflect the sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression of the victims, and that's consistent with the legislation. The recommendations from ANOVA be referred to the Chief of Police and Deputy Chiefs to review the verdict of coroner's jury inquest into the deaths of Carol Culleton, Anastasia Kuzik, and Natalie Warmerdam, and to report back to the board on any areas where operational issues addressing male violence against women would benefit from a board recommendation or support, noting that many of the recommendations we did receive were outside of operational and governance capabilities. Also, that the recommendation by both ANOVA and Ms. Geringer that the board take an intersectional approach to addressing male violence against women be incorporated into the final report to the government. And with respect to the government, I have drafted a letter for your consideration, which is addressed to the Honorable Justin Trudeau, the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, the Honorable David Lametti, the Honorable Marcy Ian, requesting a meeting with members of the board and the Femicide Observatory to discuss what steps we could take and best steps to bring forward a criminal code definition of femicide. And I'm open to questions, and if I've missed something, please let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, Member Walker, for that report and those recommendations. I believe there's 5 of them in total, 5 recommendations flowing from your report there. So
yes.
Perfect. So can we, are there any questions or discussion with regards to Member Walker's report and recommendations? Okay, seeing none. My only question is one procedural one. You referenced a letter to the Prime Minister. Is that in the package there, Member Walker? Because if it is, I must be missing it. I just don't see it.
Yes, so it was sent in as an addendum,
Okay.
which I think was sent out separately yesterday. I have mine listed under the name or the, not the, I guess the name P16 addendum.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And it may just be me.
And it's a very simple letter. There's no need to get into, in my opinion, all of the specifics at this point. We're just really requesting a meeting. I know that all of the offices this letter is going to are very aware of the London Police Services Board initiative. And I think there will be a willingness for at least one of the individuals to have a meeting with us. And I think that'll be very positive.
That's great. That's great. Perfect. Yep, Ms. Foster.
If I can just, through chair to Ms. Walker, I think then we would have to, and didn't dawn on me doing the notes here, we would have to add that we're actually approving the letter to the 5-part motion.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so technically 6. So I think that was part of the goal today, to approve the letter for sending. Actually, sorry, and I'll send this through you, Ms. Walker. We're still, I believe, going to share the letter with some of the folks that have provided input before it's actually sent. Is that?
That was not my understanding. I thought we were just sending the letter out once we had sent it out to the government officials. I think it's just too much to go back and forth. And this letter really is very simple and specific to the government. And I thought what we were doing at the conclusion before we wrote the final report was sending the feedback from the government to the individuals that had provided the feedback. But am I wrong on that? I don't see any need to send out a draft letter from the board or a letter from the board to the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet to be approved by members of the public.
So thank you, Member Walker. It's your motion, your recommendation. So if it's, you're putting it on the floor. So if you don't think there's a need, then there's no, that's not what's.
So I wouldn't put that on the floor.
Okay, very good. So I don't believe there are any questions flowing from the 6 matters now, 6 recommendations that are on the floor there. So can I get a mover for those recommendations and then a seconder, please? So we have Member Branscombe moving. Do we have a seconder for all 6, please? Councillor Cassidy. Okay. Let's all in favor, please raise your hands. Perfect. Thank you. And none opposed. Everybody's in favor. Okay. Thank you. So Ms. Foster, that motion carries.
Could I just thank everybody on the board and the public, because this is a really bold thing to do and is life-changing for women. It's life-changing to know that what they are experiencing or what a family member has experienced is femicide. It's not murder. It's not homicide. It's femicide. And that needs to be defined. And secondly, it does give the police a better opportunity then to investigate femicide as a hate crime. And I think those are really important things. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Walker. Yeah, Ms. Foster, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chair, one more thing. So we know Member Walker's passion for this topic. I wondered if the board wanted to consider a co-signing of the letter. So it comes from the chair of the board. And just with all of the work that I've sort of been very much in the background on with her over the last few months on this, I wondered if the board wanted to consider that. So I put that on the floor.
I think it's a great idea. So Megan and Susan would sign?
Yeah, so Susan as chair and Megan as, I mean, her name is synonymous with this matter. So I thought that was important because she's, we probably wouldn't have had this initiative had it not been for Megan. So
thank you for that suggestion, Ms. Foster. So before I even put that to the board, I know Member Walker would never look for that, like the work is, you know, the reward in and of itself, but is that something that you would be comfortable with, Member Walker?
I'm comfortable with it, but I don't want anybody to feel pressure to do so. But I would love to be part of the meetings with the government, that's for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. I don't know if we actually need a specific motion on that. I mean, I don't think we do, but Ms. Foster, I'll defer to you on that. It is a little deviation from typical practice, so I'm not sure if we actually need a motion, but I'm happy to ask if there's anyone that would object to that. Which I can't imagine there would be, but all right. So, so Ms. Foster, do we need a motion or no? What do you think?
Because it's a deviation, I think that if we're all okay with it, why not do the motion? It's just, I'm just
I'll move it.
tweaking the six-part motion. All I'm saying is that the sixth item is the draft letter as presented in the package has been approved to send to the Prime Minister's office, et cetera, et cetera. And letter to be co-signed by Chair of the Board and Ms. Walker.
Okay, and you know what, it takes a second, but it's cleaner for the record. Okay, so can I get a motion, a mover for that motion? Member Bransco moving, seconded by, I guess seconder for that. Councillor Cassidy, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. And thank you very much, Member Walker, for all your time, effort, and resources on this one. It's appreciated. And okay, so that concludes number 16, item 16 on the agenda. Item 17, very brief. I'll speak to that. It's the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel monthly update. It's going to be very brief because we haven't met since our last board meeting. Our last board meeting was June 16th. The last time the panel met was on the 7th, so nothing to report other than the next panel meeting will be September 27th, at which point we'll have a report at the next corresponding board meeting there. So, Member Walker, you're batting cleanup on this meeting agenda.
Yeah.
So it's right back to you here with the Mental Health Addictions Advisory Panel update.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. So the committee did meet, the panel met on Thursday, September the 8th, and received a really great presentation from Deputy Chief McIntyre. So thank you so much with respect to training and culture of London Police Service. The panel discussed the priorities and actionable items to continue to work on, and those priorities, as a reminder, are work on eliminating stigma, support the COAST program, provide trauma-informed approach to mental health and addictions, and the panel is also drafting a position statement for MHAP, which will be reviewed at the October meeting. So it's a great panel. I'm really happy to be on it and really appreciate Member Branscombe as well, who sits on the committee and always provides great input.
Thank you very much, Member Walker. Board, any questions, discussion with regards to the MHAP report just provided? Seeing none, we can move on to the next one. So really, there's only one other item left before we go to adjournment. You'll recall at the very top of the meeting, there was a one item for new business that when that was approved, it comes down to agenda item 19. So it's the 2023 assessment growth submissions, which is memo 2299. That's in your package there, and there's a motion, proposed motion there, but is there any, I can read the proposed motion, but is there any debate or discussion that with regards to the potential motion that the Finance and Administration recommends the board approve the LPS administration to present to the city treasurer the submission for assessment growth funding to support the identified 24 positions? So before we even get to that part, are there any questions, debate, discussion flowing from that item there? Okay, seeing none, can I get a mover for the motion that I just read? Member Branscombe moved, seconded by Member Walker. Is there anyone opposed to that? Councillor Helmer. All right, so I'm seeing only Councillor Helmer there. Just for the record, all in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. So Ms. Foster, that motion passes. which then takes us to, I believe that's it, adjournment. So I just want to state for everybody here that the next London Police Services Board meeting is currently scheduled for October 20th, 2022. And with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. We'll get this motion to adjourn in properly this time, Ms. Foster. All right, so let the record show that the mover is Member Branscombe, seconded by Member Walker. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, let that be reflected in the record. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. We'll
Yeah.
see you next meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Good job, Valley.
Thank you very much, Mayor.